The village of Omuokiri lay beneath the golden rays of the morning sun, surrounded by vast fields of yam and cassava. The villagers bustled about, selling goods in the marketplace and tending to their farms. Yet, amid the vibrant life of the community, there was one man who moved like a shadow: Ease, the poor wanderer. Ease had once been a proud farmer, but fate had been unkind. A terrible drought had swallowed his crops, and sickness had taken his wife and son. Left with nothing but sorrow and tattered clothes, he roamed the streets, seeking shelter and scraps from generous souls. On this particular day, he stood by the village well, watching people pass by with baskets full of goods and pots filled with water. His stomach growled, but he had only 3 copper coins in his pocket, barely enough to buy a small loaf of bread. As he contemplated his next move, the sound of soft weeping reached his ears. Turning towards the marketplace, he saw a little girl, no older than 10, sitting on the dusty ground. Her face was streaked with tears, and her clothes were worn and patched. Curious and concerned, Ease approached her. "My child, why do you weep?" he asked gently. The girl sniffed and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "My mother is gravely ill. I was sent to buy medicine, but I lost the money on my way here. Now, I have nothing, and my mother, she may not survive." Ease's heart clenched at the girl's words. He understood the pain of losing loved ones all too well. He looked at the coins in his hand, the only thing that stood between him and starvation. Yet, as he gazed into the girl's tearful eyes, he felt a stirring deep within him, a reminder that kindness, even in the face of suffering, was the greatest wealth of all. Without hesitation, Ease stretched out his hand and placed the coins in the girl's trembling palm. "Take this," he said softly. "Save your mother." The girl's eyes widened in disbelief. "But this is all you have." Ease smiled faintly. "A life is worth more than coins." The girl hesitated for a moment before clutching the coins tightly and running off toward the healer's hut. Ease watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling a strange warmth in his heart despite the emptiness in his stomach. He turned away and wandered toward the village outskirts, unaware that the seed of kindness he had just planted would one day return to him in ways he could never imagine. The sun slowly descended behind the hills of Omuokiri, casting a golden hue over the village. The market women packed up their goods, and the farmers returned from their fields. Yet, as the village prepared for the evening, Ease wandered the lonely paths that led to the forest's edge. Hunger gnawed at his insides, and his legs trembled from weakness. The 3 coins he had given away were his last hope for a meal, but he found strange comfort in the thought that somewhere in the village, a mother was being saved because of his sacrifice. Ease sat beneath an ancient palm tree, staring at the fading sky. Memories of his once prosperous life flooded his mind. How he once tilled the land with pride, how laughter filled his home when his wife, Neka, prepared the evening meal, and how his son, Chimika, would run to him with open arms after a long day on the farm. But all that was gone now. The drought had taken his crops, and the fever had stolen his family. The world had turned its back on him, leaving him to walk the earth like a forgotten spirit. As darkness fell, the wind howled through the trees, and the sounds of crickets echoed from the bushes. Ease curled up on the bare ground, shivering from the cold. His body ached, and his heart yearned for an end to his suffering. In the distance, he could hear the faint laughter of the villagers who had homes to return to, food to eat, and loved ones to embrace. He felt invisible, as if the earth itself had rejected him. "Is this my fate?" he whispered to the night. "To die in loneliness and hunger?" A sudden rustle in the bushes startled him. He turned, expecting to see a wild animal, but instead, an elderly woman emerged from the shadows. Her wrinkled face was illuminated by the dim light of the moon, and her eyes carried the wisdom of many years. "You carry a heavy heart, my son," the old woman said in a raspy voice. Ease lowered his gaze. "Life has been cruel to me, Mama. I have lost everything." The old woman stepped closer and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, the earth tests those with pure hearts. But remember, kindness is like a seed planted in the soil. Though it may seem buried and forgotten, it will one day sprout and bear fruit." Ease looked at her, confused. "But what good is kindness when it leaves me with nothing?" The woman smiled faintly. "The universe never forgets an act of kindness. In your darkest hour, It will return to you when you least expect it. Before Ease could respond, the woman turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving him with her words echoing in his mind. Weeks turned into months, and Ease's suffering deepened. The villagers avoided him, some calling him cursed, others blaming him for the drought that plagued the land. He became nothing more than a shadow, wandering the village streets, hoping to find leftover food or a place to rest his head. One fateful evening, the skies above Umuokiri darkened with heavy clouds. The air grew thick, and the wind howled like restless spirits. A violent storm swept through the village, tearing roofs off huts and flooding the streets. The villagers screamed in panic as trees fell and lightning struck the earth with fury. In the midst of the chaos, he sought shelter beneath an abandoned hut near the riverbank. But as the storm raged on, the river began to swell, threatening to overflow its banks. Suddenly, a powerful wave crashed against the hut, shattering its walls and sweeping Ease into the raging waters. He fought desperately against the current, but the river's force was merciless. His limbs grew weak, and he felt himself sinking. In that moment, as death seemed certain, a figure dove into the water and grabbed him by the arm. With incredible strength, the person pulled Ease to the riverbank and laid him on the ground. Coughing and gasping for air, Ease looked up to see a young woman standing before him, drenched from head to toe. Her eyes burned with determination and recognition. "It is you," she whispered. Ease squinted, trying to place her face. "I am Ada," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The little girl you once saved with your last coins. My mother lived because of your kindness. I swore that if fate ever brought me face to face with the man who saved us, I would do everything to repay him." Ease's heart pounded as her words sank in. The storm raged on, but in that moment, Ease felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. The seed of kindness he had sown in the past had sprouted in his darkest hour, just as the old woman had said. "Come with me," Ada said, helping him to his feet. "Your suffering ends today." With tears streaming down his face, Ease followed Ada through the storm, unaware that destiny had just begun to rewrite his story. The morning sun rose gently over the village of Umuokiri, casting its golden glow on the rooftops and dusty paths. But while the villagers went about their daily activities, whispers filled the air like the distant hum of ancient spirits. The poor man who once roamed the streets, begging for food and shelter, had been rescued from the jaws of death during the great storm. And not by just anyone, but by the mysterious and wealthy woman who lived in the grandest compound in the village. No one knew how or why Ada, the woman who had risen from poverty to wealth, had brought this wretched man into her home. But curiosity burned in the hearts of the villagers like fire on dry wood. In the palace of the wealthy stranger, Ease sat on the edge of a soft mat in a spacious room, staring at the walls adorned with fine carvings and animal skins. His body, once weak and frail, was now clothed in fine linen. The aroma of roasted fish and spicy vegetable soup filled the air, but Ease could barely eat. How did he end up here? What had he done to deserve this mercy? His thoughts were interrupted as Ada stepped into the room, her presence commanding attention. She was no longer the helpless little girl he once met in the marketplace. She had grown into a graceful woman, her skin glowing like polished ebony, and her eyes burning with strength and wisdom. Ease lowered his head, ashamed. "Why have you saved me, my daughter?" he asked softly. "I am but a broken man, rejected by this world." Ada smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You may have forgotten me, but I have never forgotten you. Papa Ease," she said. Ease's eyes widened. "Papa Ease." "Yes," Ada nodded. "I am the little girl you once gave your last coins to. The girl whose mother was dying. You saved my mother's life when the world turned its back on us. You gave us hope when we had none." Ease's heart pounded as memories of that fateful day flooded his mind. He remembered the tearful little girl he had met in the marketplace, the coins he gave her, and the hunger that followed him afterward. I remember," Ease stammered, tears streaming down his face. "But how did you come to such wealth and greatness?" Ada's expression softened as she began to tell her story. After Ease's act of kindness, Ada had rushed to the village healer and bought the medicine that saved her mother's life. Though her mother survived, life remained difficult. They were still poor and often went days without food. But the gods had witnessed Isa's kindness. The traveling merchant, who was once a friend of Ada's late father, heard of their struggles and took pity on them. He offered Ada's mother a place in his household to serve as a cook, while Ada was sent to the city to work as a maid for the merchant's wife. In the city, Ada's sharp mind and humble spirit caught the attention of the merchant's wife, who treated her like a daughter and ensured she received an education. Over the years, Ada grew into a woman of wisdom and grace, learning the art of trade and business from her master. When the merchant and his wife passed away, they left Ada with great wealth and connections. She returned to Umuokiri as a wealthy woman, but her heart never forgot the poor man who had shown her kindness when no one else would. For years, Ada said, her voice trembling, I searched for you. I sent messengers to every corner of the land, but you had vanished like the wind. I thought you were lost forever, until the gods brought you back to me through the storm. Ys wept like a child, overwhelmed by emotions. I thought my kindness was forgotten. I thought my suffering was in vain. Ada knelt before him and held his hands. No, Papa Ys. The gods never forget a pure heart. Your kindness has returned to you, and from this day forward, you shall want for nothing. Word spread across Umuokiri like wildfire. The villagers, who once mocked and rejected Ys, gathered outside Ada's compound, eager to catch a glimpse of the man whose kindness had returned to him in ways that shook the heavens. When Ada led Ys out of the compound and into the village square, the crowd fell silent. Men who once refused him work now bowed in shame. Women who turned their backs on him now wept in remorse. The elders of the village, dressed in their flowing robes, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Let this be a lesson to all, the oldest elder declared. Kindness is a seed planted in the soil of time. Though it may seem buried, it will one day sprout and bear fruit in the most unexpected way. The crowd roared in agreement, and the people of Umuokiri began to sing songs of praise for Ys and Ada. From that day forward, Ys lived as a man of honor and respect. Ada built him a grand hut within her compound and treated him as a father. She gave him fine clothes, servants to attend to his needs, and land to call his own. And no longer was he known as the poor beggar who roamed the streets. He became Ys, the man of honor, whose story echoed across villages far and wide. And when Ada married a nobleman from a neighboring kingdom, Ys stood by her side as a proud father, watching her receive the honor and respect she deserved. Though the world had once cast him aside, fate had woven a tale that proved that kindness is never wasted. Years passed, and Ys's name became a legend that echoed through the land. His story was told around village fires, in the marketplaces, and among travelers who journeyed from distant lands. Yet, even as time moved forward, Ys never forgot the bitter taste of rejection, the pain of hunger, and the loneliness that once wrapped around his soul like a dark shadow. In Ada's compound, he lived as a man of honor, but deep within him, a silent battle raged. One evening, as the golden sun melted behind the hills, Ys sat beneath the great Irako tree in Ada's compound, watching the servants tend to the animals. Despite his new life of comfort and respect, Ys often found himself lost in thought, wondering why fate had chosen him to endure such suffering before receiving this blessing. Ada noticed his distant gaze and approached him with gentle steps. Papa Ys, she called softly, sitting beside him. Why do you look troubled? Ys sighed deeply. My daughter, the world may see me as a man who has risen from suffering, but the wounds of rejection and humiliation still burn within me. I cannot forget the days when I begged for food, and the very people who now bow before me once spat at my feet. Ada listened with deep understanding. Papa Ys, she began, do you know why the gods allowed you to go through such pain? Ys shook his head. It was because they were preparing you for something greater, Ada said. Had you not walked through the fire of suffering, you would never have crossed paths with me. Your kindness was a seed planted in the soil of time. And today, that seed has grown into a tree that shades not only me, but an entire generation. Ys's eyes welled with tears. You are right, my daughter, he said. But I fear that those who mocked me have only changed their hearts because of your wealth and influence. Ada smiled knowingly. Let us put them to the test, she said. The following day, Ada summoned the village elders and announced that she was organizing a great feast in honor of her father, Ys. The entire village was invited, from the wealthiest farmers to the poorest laborers. On the day of the feast, Ada instructed her servants to prepare 2 sets of food. One set was placed on golden trays, decorated with fine leaves and spices, while the other was served on broken calabashes and wooden plates, with simple dishes of roasted yam and palm oil. Before the feast began, Ada stood before the crowd and spoke. "Let those who truly honor ease and respect him for his heart, not his wealth, eat from the wooden plates," she declared. "And let those who honor only his new status eat from the golden trays." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. The wealthy men and women who once despised ease hesitated. Their eyes darted toward the golden trays, while the poor laborers, who had known ease's suffering, humbly stepped forward and ate from the wooden plates without shame. Ease watched in awe as the truth of men's hearts was revealed before him. When the feast ended, Ada stood again and said, "Today, the gods have shown us that true respect comes not from wealth or status, but from the heart that remembers kindness." The crowd fell silent in shame. From that day, the hearts of the villagers began to change. Those who once looked down on ease now sought his wisdom. Young men came to him for advice, and mothers brought their children to hear his stories of survival and kindness. Ease became a symbol of hope and redemption. The village elders invited him to their council meetings, seeking his counsel on matters of justice and unity. Ada, who had once been an outcast, was now celebrated as the woman who rose from nothing to greatness, all because of the kindness of a poor man who gave her his last coins. One evening, as the moon cast its silver light over Omyokuri, Ease stood on the hill that overlooked the village. Beside him stood Ada and her husband, Obi, a noble warrior from a neighboring village. "I once thought I had lost everything," Ease said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But today, I see that I gained something far greater, a daughter, a family, and a legacy that will never die." Ada wiped her tears and held Ease's hand. "You did not lose, Papa Ease," she said. "You were chosen by the gods to show the world that kindness is the greatest power a man can possess." Ease lived many more years, loved and respected by all. When he finally closed his eyes in eternal rest, the entire village of Omyokuri mourned his passing. That in honor of his memory, Ada built a grand monument in the heart of the village, carved with the words, "He who gives with a pure heart shall never be forgotten by the gods." Generations after, travelers and strangers who passed through Omyokuri would hear the tale of the poor man who gave his last coins to a little girl, and how that little girl rose to greatness and saved his life when the world turned its back on him. And so, the echo of kindness continued to live on, passed from one generation to the next, as a reminder that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we give from the heart. Many seasons had passed since Ease, the poor man whose kindness changed destiny, was laid to rest beneath the great Iroko tree in Ada's compound. But his story did not die with him. The tale of how a poor man gave his last coins to a little girl, only for that girl to rise to greatness and save his life in return, became more than just a story. It became a legacy that shaped the hearts and minds of generations yet unborn. In the years that followed Ease's passing, the village of Omyokuri transformed in ways no one could have imagined. Where once greed, envy, and selfishness ruled the hearts of men, kindness and compassion became the foundation upon which the community thrived. Ada, who had inherited great wealth from her late master, used her fortune to build schools for the children of the village. She established a great marketplace where both the rich and the poor could trade freely, and no man was turned away because of his status. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the hearts of the people. The villagers, who once despised and rejected Ease, now told his story to their children and grandchildren. They spoke of his humility, his sacrifice, and how the gods rewarded his kindness in ways the world could never understand. In honor of Ease's memory, Ada established an annual festival known as Ifeoma, meaning the light of kindness. During this festival, the people of Omyokuri would gather in the village square, dressed in white robes as a symbol of purity. They would cook large pots of food and distribute them to the poor and the needy. Just as Ease once gave his last coins to save a dying woman, the elders would sit under the ancient Iroko tree and tell the story of Ease to the younger generation, reminding them that kindness is the greatest gift a man can offer the world. Ise's story did not remain confined to Umuokiri. Travelers and merchants who visited the village during the Ife Oma festival carried the tale to distant lands. It spread across neighboring villages, through the great rivers, and into the hearts of kings and warriors. In distant lands, rulers began to embrace justice and fairness. The poor and the weak found refuge in the kindness of strangers, and communities once divided by hatred and envy began to heal. Many who heard the tale of Ise and Ada sought out the poor and the forgotten in their own villages, offering help and compassion, believing that the gods would one day reward them as they had rewarded Ise. As Ada grew older, her heart remained filled with gratitude for the man who saved her life and shaped her destiny. Though she had married and bore children, she considered Ise her true father and often told his story to her sons and daughters. One fateful evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ada stood before Ise's grave beneath the great Irako tree. She held a clay pot filled with fresh palm wine and poured it on the earth as a sign of honor and respect. "My father," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The world may have forgotten your suffering, but your kindness has become an unending river that flows through generations. I am who I am because of you, and my children, and their children after them, will never forget the man who gave without expecting anything in return." At that moment, the wind blew softly through the trees, and the leaves of the Irako tree rustled as if the gods themselves were nodding in approval. Generations after, the echo of kindness still lives on. Long after Ada and her generation had passed, the story of Ise became woven into the very fabric of the land. Children grew up hearing the tale, and fathers told their sons, "If you wish to be remembered by the gods, give with a pure heart, as Ise once did." Travelers who visited Umuokiri would stop by the great Iroko tree and leave offerings of food and coins, not to honor the gods, but to honor the man whose kindness changed destiny. It is said that on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the village sleeps, the wind whispers through the leaves of the Iroko tree, carrying the words, "He who gives with a pure heart shall never be forgotten by the gods."